As a 20-something-year-old straight man, I don't think there's been a show that more accurately and authentically represents men and male relationships than JG Quintel's Regular Show. And I think that this is the case because while the series in general is incredibly wacky and over the top, the show is unafraid to showcase the realities and lived experiences of what it's like to be a young man. Regular Show isn't afraid to portray its characters as toxic, unmanly, or just flat-out works in progress. No, the show, despite the many otherworldly mishaps that occur over the course of the series, isn't afraid to show male characters as real and relatable. And before I can get any further, I will of course have to talk about spoilers, and I will mainly be referencing seasons 1 through 4 of the show, because let's be honest, the latter half of the series, despite having some real highlights, just isn't as iconic. And I will be talking about other media as well, so consider this a warning. And with that, let's talk about how Regular Show writes men. And what better way to start off than by talking about the show's main duo. Mordecai and Rigby are the very heart of Regular Show, and here's the thing. They are not good people. One of the reasons why Regular Show stands out from the rest of the shows that the men of my generation grew up watching was that they were allowed to be relatable. They weren't written as chosen one kinds of characters that happened to be at the right place at the right time and were forced to become unlikely heroes like Ben 10 or Aang. In fact, Mordecai and Rigby are very much the opposite of those characters who have willingly risked their lives to save others on multiple occasions. They're selfish, averse to growth, and are infamously slackers. They take the easy way out when it comes to their work and achieving their other goals, and this is what usually leads to the hijinks that ensue in their adventures in the park. And the beauty of this is that it tends to illustrate a stronger message that seems to resonate more with young men. Not every act needs to be done for the greater good or because you're a better person. Yes, in an ideal world, everybody is a good person and chooses the morally correct option 100% of the time, but the reality is that people are selfish, like Mordecai and Rigby. In fact, sometimes the only motivation you need to do something is because you fear punishment and repercussion. And Regular Show is one of the few shows that is willing to acknowledge this reality, because many men are raised with the expectation that they have to be better people. And that's true, but such expectations can be exhausting. The reality of life is that nobody is choosing to be the better person 100% of the time. Regular Show is different, because it illustrates the idea that sometimes it's okay to act in your own self-interest. And what's even crazier is that some of these episodes even end with Mordecai and Rigby getting away with it. They don't face any consequences for their actions. For example, the episode where Rigby grills the hot dogs without Benson's consent, and yet somehow manages to pass the blame to his boss. And that's how the episode ends. Rigby grilled the hot dogs when he was explicitly told not to, and Benson gets the blame while he's none the wiser about what happened in the rest of the episode. And this episode raised an eyebrow from me, because that's not how good men do react, but that's definitely how some men choose to react. But going back to Mordecai and Rigby, what's interesting with them and the rest of the park gang is that they act so authentically because they were written how Quintel himself would act. After all, the show's creator took many influences from his experiences as a young man going through college and put them into the show. Everything from the iconic "whoa" sound that the boys make to the squinting and snickering at each other, and of course Muscle Man's "my mom" jokes, are all things that boys and young men would do. And because of the show's popularity, it's hard to say whether life imitates art or vice versa in this regard. And a lot of people will look at the way that these characters act and interact with each other and just chalk it up to guys being guys. But what does that even really mean? Well, let's also talk about how men relate to each other with solid examples from the show. Because the show does not pull its punches when it comes to showing how men interact with other men. In fact, I would even argue that Regular Show is probably the most accurate and authentic portrayal of how young men relate to each other out of any media that I've consumed. And first of all, I want to talk about how men and Regular Show use teasing as a form of intimacy. But instead, I would use the term roasting, which I'm gonna assume you already know the meaning of, and if you don't, you've been living under a rock. The men on this show roast each other like crazy, especially Mordecai and Rigby. They make fun of each other's shortcomings and insecurities constantly, which is odd because you would think that poking at someone's flaws would make them incredibly uncomfortable. But for men, roasting each other is a bit of an art form. It's a language on its own and just one of the ways men share affection with each other indirectly. We see this a lot, especially through characters like Mordecai, Rigby, and Muscle Man. They seemingly bully and prank each other constantly, but at the end of the day, they remain fast friends who would lay down their lives for one another. And I call roasting an art form because while it may seem juvenile on the surface, there's actually a lot of nuance to it. And Regular Show understands this, because when you roast someone, you're willing to bet that person is comfortable enough with you that you can can make that joke without pissing them off. And because you're willing to take that risk, if received well, the other person will ironically view you more positively, because you're brave enough to risk offending someone for the sake of a joke, and bravery is of course a very masculine value. There's also a sense of trust being built through roasting. When you roast a friend, you're trusting that they're secure enough in themselves that they're able to acknowledge their weaknesses and laugh about them, and that if they do take it personally, the friendship won't be seriously damaged. But just like any risk, there's a chance that roasting may backfire, and that's part of it. In fact, a lot of episodes have a problem that results from the roasting or prank being taken too far, like when Mordecai and Rigby are too afraid to tell Muscleman that the lottery ticket they got him is actually a fake, or when Mordecai beats Rigby at punchies a little too much that it understandably bruises his ego. This aspect of the show teaches young men that roasting each other does have its place. It shows camaraderie in a way that simple praise and compliments can only ever dream of. But it also shows that when taken too seriously or done too liberally, it may have the opposite effect of hurting friendships rather than building them. And I'm sure a lot of men watching this video can share some experience of this in the comment. And male competitiveness as affirmation is a similar phenomenon that regular show showcases pretty well. Competitiveness kind of functions like a relationship building tool between men, affirming each other that the other person is worth testing themselves against. Because in many cases, male competitiveness is actually rooted in respect. It communicates to the other person that they're good enough to the point that beating them would actually mean something. And regular show does a very good job of portraying this as a way for men to build better relationships with each other. Mordecai and Rigby in particular compete with each other constantly, many times over trivial things like staring contests, having a rock paper scissors game, or beating Muscleman in fives in basketball. And it's through these seemingly meaningless competitions that the group builds trust with each other. And a lot of people seem to think that competition is framed as this inherently toxic thing, but that's not necessarily true. It only really becomes a problem if one of the men involved in said competition is toxic themselves. For example, the episode where Skips takes on the Park Gang in arm wrestling, but Rigby cheats to beat him. Rigby cheating is a dick move, but so is Skips murdering him in cold blood just for doing so. The funny thing is, in the end, they both acknowledge that what they did was wrong and just move on with their lives as if nothing happened. And two men agreeing that they both messed up and moving on with their lives is undoubtedly a peak male experience. Another good example is Rigby's relationship with his younger brother Don. Because of his little brother's charisma, he has always felt like he's inferior to him, and this manifests in him refusing to show affection and seemingly sever ties with him. On the surface, competitiveness between men looks immature and petty, but underneath all of that, there's a foundation of mutual respect. Because competition only works when both people believe that the relationship can survive with one of them losing, and that's what makes it so intimate. But like roasting, the show does make it a point to show that competition, when taken too seriously, can be toxic and harmful. And that's just such a nuanced message to be showing to a younger audience. But you know how else men tend to create bonds with each other? Through shared hardship and experiences that function as foundations for friendship. In fact, shared experiences are probably the main and strongest way that men develop friendships. For many men, their closest friends are usually the ones they've suffered the most with. To use myself as an example, some of my best friends in my life are the ones that I went through high school with because I spent 4 years seeing those guys every single day. We went through the same tests, took the same classes, had the same teachers, and liked the same girls, and all of that jazz. Those guys are my brothers, and I speak of them the same way that veterans talk about their platoon mates whom they served with. Like it or not, we're bonded because we've gone through the same hardships, and we laugh about those same experiences. And the Park Gang is no different. In fact, the episode where Rigby hires Attempt to do the work for him is the perfect example of how shared experiences create a feeling of camaraderie among men. Because Rigby hires someone else to do his work for him out of sheer laziness, he is no longer part of the shared experience of working at the park. Thus, his friends start taking a liking to his temp rather than the original Rigby, whom they seemingly forget exists. And to cite a real-world example of the importance of shared experience and struggle, think about the main third space that men tend to have, which is the gym. Gym bros typically end up becoming friends, or at least friendly with each other, not even through interacting with each other, but just by being in the same space and lifting the same weights. Simply by being there and being present, you are building a bond. And I think one of the reasons why young men aren't having these same friendships and are continually having a harder time creating them is because they're having trouble finding these shared experiences. For example, studies have shown that fewer boys and young men these days are choosing to participate in organized team sporting activities like basketball and football. And this data can be interpreted in a number of ways, but in the context context of male friendship, it shows that boys are choosing not to participate in a low-stakes activity that can benefit them in the long run by giving them, among other things, a chance to build lasting friendships. More than anything else, shared experience and hardship is how men build connection with each other. And through an episode with such a simple premise, Regular Show fully captures this idea. Because to work with other people means to endure discomfort with them and generate meaningful experiences with them. And it's better to deal with said discomfort with the people you love than to live comfortably but not have them in your life. Because when push comes to shove, the Park Gang will always stand by each other. Whether that's fighting Tyler the Creator in a rap battle or engaging in a karaoke bar fight, Mordecai, Rigby, Skips, Benson, Pops, Fives, and Muscle Man will always have each other's backs. And there's a very subtle beauty in that because guys don't talk about our feelings with each other. The way we process our emotions is done through being with each other. For example, Mordecai doesn't want to talk about how he feels about Margaret moving away, and Rigby respects that and simply sits down next to him and shows Mordecai that he's not alone in his sorrow. And I think that's one of the most beautiful moments in the entire show. But in the rare moments that the verbal communication is there, it's done in such a beautiful way. It's almost always emphasized as a brief but meaningful moment between the male characters. And a character that has a lot of opportunities for this is Muscle Man. He's characterized as this toxic, macho, and I say that with air quotes, and generally obnoxious individual. He's loud, arrogant, offensive, and a caricature of what people typically don't like in men in general. Somehow he has a girlfriend though. Anyway, usually he's portrayed as a rival and antagonist to Mordecai and Rigby, but it's when he shows emotion and vulnerability that really helped him grow on me as a character. When Rigby needs a mentor, it's Muscle Man who teaches him things and helps him grow. When he's afraid that his friends won't miss him after he gets scouted to become a gut model, he only gets the reassurance he needs after he shows vulnerability and talks about his true feelings. And in one of my favorite episodes, when his father dies, he opens up to Mordecai and Rigby about how he would bond with him and what a great guy he was. And the duo do whatever they can, including putting their lives on the line just to help him out. And that leads me to one of the most important roles that men play in each other's lives, which is lifting each other up. Because towards the end of most of the episodes on the show, even if they're not directly involved in what started the issue or even the very victims of said issue that they're facing, the Park Gang is always willing to stick up for each other. Because real friends may roast each other, but when the time comes, it's your boys who will always be by your side, and I think Regular Show illustrates this truth to a T. And you know what other aspect of male culture the show authentically portrays? No, not my mom, but men in love. Because as much as people like to make fun of Mordecai for being a simp and having seemingly little self-respect when it comes to Margaret, I think a lot of young men have seen themselves in Mordecai's shoes. And I think that's okay because I know I definitely have. Through Mordecai, the show accurately portrays what being afraid to make a move out of fear of rejection or constantly biding your time is really like. It shows how actually damaging being afraid to make a move really is, and how dangerous it can be to center your life and make decisions based entirely on the whims of another person. Because at many points throughout the story, Mordecai chooses his feelings for Margaret over his best friend, and that causes so much friction between them that really didn't have to exist had Mordecai seemingly done other things instead of obsessing over this girl. And even when he finally gets Margaret, he's willing to completely erase their first kiss from existence just because it doesn't line up with the image of her that he's created in his head. Mordecai is a simp and deserves to be made fun of, but so have a lot of guys, including myself. Because the beauty of this is that this portrayal of Mordecai being a toxic, spineless coward when it comes to love was probably a wake-up call for a lot of young men who grew up watching this show. If you were in love and watched Mordecai and had any semblance of self-awareness, you would know that Regular Show gave you the blueprint of exactly what not to do. And that's honestly just a canon event that's required for your personal growth. And in contrast, I think that's the beauty of Rigby's and Eileen's relationship. It happens organically. Rigby doesn't chase her or try to tailor himself to be perfect for her. He simply exists and lived lives to his most authentic self and ended up attracting a baddie while doing so. And that's how Regular Show writes men. Realistically, authentically, and relatably. And if you ask me, I think that's whack.